And so, hello everyone, and welcome to our final online seminars for the autumn series for the GEPIC project. Today we have Dr. Marta Fraile. She's a permanent senior researcher at Spanish Scientific Research Institute, CSIC, working at the Institute of Public Goods and Policies, it's IPP, where she is also the vice director. She holds the national certification for the role of full professor in social sciences in Spain and in Italy. Her research spans across the fields of public opinion, media effects, and gender and politics. Currently, she directs 2 research projects investigating the psychological mechanisms that explain the perceived distance women experience in relation to the political realm compared to men. Additionally, she is involved in the European project Twice as Good, overseeing the Spanish case study. In this capacity, she delves into the components of the gender penalty, in quotes, faced by women candidates during electoral campaigns. And so today she'll be presenting on her paper, Closing the Gender Gap in Internal Political Efficacy, Gender Roles and the Masculine Ethos of Politics in Spain. And so I'll hand it over to Marta now.
Okay, thanks a lot for the presentation, and thanks also for the invitation to present. I think we can jump a little bit because the paper I'm presenting today is a co-authored paper together with my colleague Dani Marinova from the University Autónoma University of Barcelona, and this is a paper that has been recently accepted for publication in Political Behavior, and I'm presenting most of the material coming from the paper and then some additional data that we have collected more recently. Starting from the topic, which is the gender gap in internal political efficacy, since your project is about this topic, I don't think I need to employ a lot of time in convincing you how important it is, but just I wanted to illustrate for those of you who might not be so familiarized, the size of the gender gap in internal political efficacy according to the evidence portrayed by the European Social Survey. If you can pass you can see there's this, for example, these 2 survey items asking people, how able do you think you are to take an active role in a group involved with political issues, or how confident are you in your own ability to participate in politics? These are 2 typical ways of measuring. There are other ways, and you already know. And here you can see the size of the gender gap across countries for these 2 specific issues. So we all know that feeling that you don't have the competencies and the abilities to participate and to get involved in politics is an important component of democratic participation. So it is worth to explore about the reasons, on why such is the case. So what has previous literature told us about the topic? And if you can pass another one, please. Okay, so the literature, there are like 3 main factors that have been explained by the literature about the explanation on the existence and the persistence of the gender gap in internal political efficacy. The first one is linked to socioeconomic resources, and the argument is that the more resources that you have, the more that you feel efficacious. And since women have traditionally had less access to resources, this is the reason, The second explanation is more connected to this idea of the role mode theory, and explain the persistence in the gap on the grounds that there's an absence of relevant, prominent women, like in the front of politics, like prime ministers or chief of the executive, that could inspire young girls and adolescents and transmit the idea that politics is not only about men, but they can also see women figures. The evidence showing this is very limited, because partly is explained because there are still very few prominent women. So we don't have a lot of variation to play with that, no, or to leverage to do our analysis. The third line of research or line of explanations is the one that connects the gender socialization processes to explain why women have less or are less politically efficacious than men. And basically, in a very brief way, the majority of the studies argue that well, these socialization rules dictate that women are innate caregivers. So this implies that they don't have time to dedicate to politics because they have a lot of do at home, they have a lot of do also at work. So this create a kind of disconnection with the political world that retro, yeah, well, I don't know the word in English, like a circle of disconnection, no? Now, if you use a very naive approach to predict political efficacy, a summary of the two items I showed you before, you can see that controlling for the typical resources, you see that, of course, yeah, well, having children decreases the probabilities of being politically efficacious, you know, education increases, net income increases, the probabilities of feeling politically efficacious, but the size of the gender gap remains. You know? So this is estimated with the country fixed effects. So our paper contributes to this third line of the literature, which is about gender socialization rules. This is where we contribute. So if you pass the slide, please. We use basically the social role theory, which very briefly argues that existing segregated social roles of women and men contribute creating gender stereotypes. No, that is when you assign to a given person certain behaviors, attitudes, expectations, abilities, just because they are part of that social group, no, of women or men. So if you pass to the next one, the origin of this is, of course, physical and biological differences between men and women. No, I'm talking about, you know, hormones or bone and muscle mass, and from this, the parting point of, you know, physical and biological differences, then these are reinforced through the socialization process, of course, through different mechanisms depending on the socialization agent we might look at. So if you pass the slide, the first socialization agent is family. So there are many different ways in which family can transmit gender rules to children. The most relevant one is imitation. So children imitate the behavior of their parents. So if there is a social division of work, for example, within the family, children will tend to reproduce it. No, I just, to illustrate it, just put this vignette of Mafalda, no, where she goes around the house, and at the very end, she asks to her mother, "Mom, what would you like to be if ever you could live?" No. So this is one of the mechanisms that through which gender roles are transmitted within the family. Of course, there are other influences, and if you can pass the slide, the first one is school, and here again the role mode is women being teachers, especially in the first years of education, where caring is as important as transmitting, no, cognitive skills, and there's a huge level of feminization, no, in the schools, in the first levels of the schools. So children see women teachers there, no, taking care of them. So this is another way of reproducing this idea that women are more linked to caring, no. Another influence could be also the toys market. That as you know, is now very segregated by sex. So they have understood the business, that they can do a lot of business with segregating the products. I wanted to bring some anecdotal examples of how this works. No, you can see in the bottom the advertisement of Lego during the 80s. You can see very unisex, no, where both girls and boys were portrayed playing with the Legos, and compare it to the Legos today, no, that is very segregated by girls and boys, no. Not to speak about, for example, the dress market, again, where you can find many subliminal messages, no. Here I put just a couple of pajamas showing images about or ideas about what a woman is and what a man is, no, and what are the more typical traits attached to them. Another example of this, what do children see, no, and adolescents see in their society, is, for example, the labor market. We know that there is a huge level of segregation, and there are certain sectors that are feminized, no, like, for example, all sectors linked to caring, like healthcare or education, whereas there are some other sectors like building or technology where you can see much less number of women. So all of these, to say, if you pass the slide, is what is portrayed in the social role model. No, you arrive to this communal versus agentic model, no, in which the stereotypical image or idea about women, we tend to think about women more in terms of okay, they are helpful, they are collaborative, supportive, caring. Whereas in the case of men, we tend to associate to men this idea of innovation, transformation, competition, no, risk loving. And these are the so-called communal versus agentic models of personality, no? So now this probably may sound a little bit old-fashioned to you, but you will be surprised how it is reproduced and persistent in societies. Now, how this has been measured in the academia, if you pass the slide, we've got one example with the Ben sex role inventory. Some people will say this is, you know, something of the of the past, very old-fashioned. But this consists on a number of items that people have to choose or to declare how far they feel attached to each of these traits. And some of them are typically feminine, some of them are typically masculine for measuring masculinity, and some others are neutral. Now, normally what it is used is a reduced version of the Ben sex role inventory. Okay, so if you pass the slide, these social models create expectations about how people behave. And normally those people who adopt their stereotypical traits and roles will be socially rewarded, while those who deviate from them tend to be more penalized, socially penalized. Okay, so this is more or less what the social role theory suggests. So derived from this theory, we've got the role congruity model. If you pass the slide. The role congruity model specify a little bit more the mechanism for some specific cases of existing gender gaps. Basically, the argument is that citizens are stimulated to pursue those goals that align better with their own gender roles. So this is why people choose, for example, women tend to choose more professions, for example, linked to care, because this is where they think will be more like in a comfort area, no? They will feel better there. So basically, this has been used, for example, for explaining the gender gap in political ambition, because women tend not to choose this path for themselves because they know that it's going to be a very hard life for them, because they think they don't have the specific traits that could give you power there, no? For example, or it also, this role congruity model has been used for explaining, for example, the gender gap in STEAM, no? So what we propose in this paper is to use this model also to explain the case of the gender gap in internal political efficacy, right? So what do we need for that? If you pass we need to reflect, I mean, to make a reflection about how politics is perceived by citizens. Okay, so as far as we know, there are very, very few. We were really surprised about the very few studies who analyze this empirically. But the few existing studies report that people perceive politics in a very Smithian way. No, it's that Carl Smith, concept of politics, says that politics involves groups that face off as mutual enemies. So this is pretty much what people perceive when you ask them about the political realm. So of course, this image about politics, about a competitive enterprise, is transmitted by the media. If you pass the slide, if you think, for example, about the metaphors that are more typically used for describing, for example, an electoral campaign, is all the metaphors are taken from traditionally masculine domains of, for example, war or belligerent sports, such as, for example, boxing. No, to this also contributes to this image about politics, the social media. No, this all with polarization and competition. No, it seems like all posts or reports that speak about politics in this fierce way get more audience. No, and of course also the politicians themselves contribute to this, to transmit this idea about politics, right? So if you pass the slide, please. Our main argument in the paper is that politics evoke to citizen traits that align more on the agentic dimension of the social model, right? And so this is the reason why women tend to feel less political efficacious, because the political word is a word that is masculine, is defined in masculine terms. Okay, so from here we derive two set of hypotheses. If you can pass the slide, please. The first one, the first set of hypotheses is more on the explanation of the persistence of the gap. So basically, we test the hypothesis that women are more likely to identify with the traits on the communal dimension of the social rights rather than on the agentic dimension. And then the second hypothesis is that citizens who identify themselves more strongly with the agentic traits will present higher levels of internal political efficacy, while attachment to communal traits will not be related to internal political efficacy. This is the first set of hypotheses. The second set of hypotheses, if you can pass the slide, please, are more about what can we do about it. Is it possible to reduce the gender gap? So here we will test hypothesis 3, which states that politics evoke traits that align on the agentic dimension of the social role model. And then the fourth hypothesis is that when politics is framed in a more communal ways, then the gender gap decreases. Okay, so these are the four hypotheses we will be testing. Now, if you pass the slide, the empirical strategy to test this set of hypotheses is we have collected 2 different studies in Spain. The first study is an original representative online survey, and we analyze it, as a typical observational study. And then we collected an additional study with another online survey that contained an experiment. Okay, so starting with the findings, if you pass the slide, in this slide you can see the predominance of social role gender models, at least in Spain, and in 2020 when we measure it. Here you can see in order, first, I think there are five traits that are considered agentic traits: self-confidence, ambition, risk-seeking, competitive, conflictive, and strong personality. And then the last five are communal: empathetic, affective, compassionate, kind, attentive, and warm. So here, the question is to what extent each of the following traits contribute defining your own personality. And here what you can see in the graph is the gender differences in the average level of attachment to each of the traits, right? So if you can, as you can see, the highest differences are in the right part of the figure, which is men tend to identify to a higher extent than women in some of the agentic traits, especially competitive, risk-seeking, and self-confident. In contrast, the differences in the communal traits are very small or even no significant, except for the trait of empathetic. Okay. The second way in which we look at this is asking people in general, do you consider each of these traits more typical of men, women, or equally men and women? And what you can see in the graph is the differences ascribed to women or to men in this case. Okay. So here you can see more clearly that as a society or in general term, the agentic traits are more typically associated to women to men in the right part, and whereas the communal traits are more typically associated to women in the left part. Right? If you pass the slide, I portray here more recent evidence from a survey we collected in December 2022. And here you see exactly the same, with a slightly different traits, competitive, risk-loving, but again, the tendency is exactly the same. Men tend to report to feel more linked to typical masculine traits, whereas women tend to report more linked to communal traits. The differences are higher for competitive, risk-loving, and leadership, whereas in the case of the communal traits in caring others. If you pass to the next one, you see also the same evidence for the typical, in general, do you consider each of these traits more typical of women or of men? Here the difference is that the communal traits are more typically attached to women than to men. The differences are higher in percentages, as you can see. But more or less we confirm the first figure with this new data. Now, if you pass the next slide, here we test the second hypothesis, which is to what extent attachment to agentic traits is associated to internal political efficacy. And here you can see that we confirm the hypothesis. Now, let me explain a little bit more the table. Here, the dependent variable is internal political efficacy and is made of an index of 3 different items. 2 of them regards participation in politics, feel capable of taking an active role in a group, or feel confident in my own ability to participate in politics. And then we have a third items regarding more like the politics in general, more in abstract, which is often I have the feeling that politics is so complicated that I can't really understand what is going on. So reversing it, we created an index that was factorized in only one dimension. So here what you can see is how, you know, some typical resources variables relate to internal political efficacy. And you can see clearly that while the agentic index, which is an index made of all the level of attachment to each of the 5 masculine traits, and communal is the same, is the level of attachment for each of the 5 communal traits. And as you can see, while the agentic index presents an association with internal political efficacy, the communal index no. So only attachment to agentic traits seem to be related to internal political efficacy. We also specified interaction term of gender with the attachment to the agentic index. If you pass the slide, you can see that this positive relationship of or association between level of attachment to agentic traits is positively related to internal political efficacy. But if you focus on the line corresponding to women, you can see that when women declare, even if on average they tend to declare less attachment to these traits, agentic traits, when for those women who declare to be highly attached to these traits, there is no gender gap. So our first, take point will be, okay, if all women were as agentic as are men, then there shouldn't be a gap in internal political efficacy. So this is like, so to speak, the solution to the gender gap in internal political efficacy that put the blame into women. Okay, so women, if you want to be as efficacious as men, just, develop an attachment to agentic traits and you will be down. This will be more or less the takeover point, no? Now, our point in the paper is, okay, but how about, rather than making all women changing themselves, and this is very difficult, of course, but there are some measures, no? Like, all those programs for trying to provide additional resources to women to increase their political ambition, their internal political efficacy, So it's something that is being done, but apparently it's not so effective as to banish the gender gap in internal political efficacy. Okay, so let's jump to the second part of the hypothesis, which is what can we do about it? What if we can change about changing the perception of the political realm? Okay, so starting with the third hypothesis, which is how do people perceive the world of politics? Here is what we used in our survey. To what extent do you identify each of the following words with the political realm? And then the second question we use is, in general, to what extent would you say that politicians aim the following? So we asked both for the political realm and for politicians, and you will understand why. Here is you can see the frequencies, and as you can see, both the image of politics in general and what do politicians aim are pretty similar. is power, competition, personal promotion, or getting power, getting recognition, or getting rich. This is how people perceive politics and politicians. The percentage of people declaring that they identify service, for example, with the word of politics, is much smaller. It's something like 23% of total respondents. Same with solving people's problems, a little bit more for agreement, which would be more like communal traits. This has been also confirmed with this most recent survey. Again, you can here we included up to 10 different traits. And as you can see, promotion, polarization, agreement. Sorry, I didn't tell you to go further with the slides. I'm so sorry. I hope you are following me. Let me check. In which, yeah, you are there. Okay, thanks. So as you can see, the perception of politics is pretty much in consonance with the agentic traits, right? There is only one word, which is agreement, that present percentages that are a little bit higher, no? But the rest, you know, like service or empathy seems to be less attached to the word of politics. Okay, so if you can pass the slide, our point in the paper is, what if the political sphere was different? So what happens if we frame or present the political realm as evoking communal traits? So we test this through an experiment, and if you pass the slide, the experiment consisted on proposing people reading a short newspaper interview with a politician. This was an anonymous politician. We didn't specify name, sex, or the political party of the politician. We just said a politician in general. And the contents of this small interview, it was about the politician's professional trajectory, its motivation to run for office, and in general, the experience of being in politics. Now, if you pass the slide, let me schematically show you the two treatments that we did. The first one was the power agentic frame. We call it like this. And you can see in the bottom of the slide the appearance of the interview we proposed to read. So it was imitating very much a typical interview that is included in the back of some newspapers, like La Vanguardia or El País in Spain. And we call it Hablando con nuestros políticos, which is something like speaking with our politicians, right? So in this first treatment, the summary of the interview that you see in yellow was, to change things in politics, you need to be ready to compete and assume risk. That is the only way for the best ideas to triumph. Okay, so politics was framed as a competitive affair, a struggle for power in which political opponents compete and make complicated decisions, assuming risk. This was the content of this first treatment. The second treatment, which was, I mean, exactly the same number of words, exactly the same vocabulary, but the only thing we changed was how politics was portrayed. This is what we call the service communal frame. If you can move the slide, please. Okay, so again, it's exactly the same, but here the frame is more communal. And the summary in yellow was, in politics, it is crucial to know how to reach agreements. Politics is a service we do to solve citizens' problems, right? So in this case, politics was framed as a public service where it is crucial to cooperate with other political actors, to solve problems and improve the lives of the citizens. Okay, so these were our participants were randomly divided in 3 different subsamples. One sample was administered treatment 1, second subsample treatment 2, and then a third subsample with no treatment, which we call the control sample. Okay, so if you can please pass to the next slide. We implemented some checks before asking for internal political efficacy. Basically, 3 of them. We included immediately after a question about the content of the article. So basically, we asked them to select the topic that was not covered in the article they read, the interview they read, which was corruption, just to see attention, to the content of the reading that they did, and we found that 82% provide correct response to this. So we also tested the credibility of the article, and we asked respondents if they could identify the politician among a list of 6 real politicians, and 85% were able to do so. So they said that, yeah, it could be a typical politician, and they even guessed which one was. And then the third check that we did is that we recorded the number of seconds employed to read the interview. So the results I'm going to share with you are a selection of those who proposed who gave us correct answer and employed more than 40 seconds in reading the short interview. We anyhow made some closeness checks, and it doesn't change if we include all of them. So here are the findings. If you move to the next slide, you see the differences for men and women in internal political efficacy by the treatment. And as you can see, the control group, which was not reading any interview, is much more similar to the group on average that was framed with the agentic frame. No. In contrast, though, for the subsample that were framed for the communal concept of politics, the gender gap decreases a lot. Well, not a lot, but decreases. And this is due to I mean, in our view, this is showing that the congruency model work in the 2 directions. That is to say, when the idea about politics or when politics was presented evoking communal traits, women slightly increased their internal political efficacy, very slightly. And then men slightly decreased their internal political efficacy. So it seems to work the 2 ways. But at the end, the explanation is the congruency. So the more congruence is your idea about politics with the attachment that you have to this idea, then the higher your level of internal political efficacy. The results are not so strong, and we recognize it in the paper, but we think are an interesting way to look at the problem, no? And to move forward in the idea of how to promote changes that could impulse, no, political efficacy among women. So yeah, if you can move the next one, in the conclusions, we think that this is enough evidence to demand the need to integrate more psychological perspective when assessing the gender gap in public opinion and political engagement more in general. And we think that the application of social role theory to the study of gender and politics can contribute to advance in our comprehension of these persistent patterns of gender differences in politics. And I think I will stop here. I don't know if I get a lot of time or not. Thank you for the attention. Oops. I remain without lights.
Thank you. Yep. So I stopped sharing, but if at any point anyone wants me to bring the slides back, just let me know.
Okay.
I will stop the recording now, and we'll kind of commence into a short question and answer. But I want to give everyone the freedom to answer